again where the new speaker will be speaking on, so it's better we start in time. We have with us CA NC Hegde, who will be again speaking on inbound investment, but other than FDI. To complete the whole inbound investment, we are divided into two sessions. Today's speaker, Shri NC Hegde, is a partner of Deloitte and is based in Mumbai. He is currently the M&A tax leader for Deloitte in India. He has a wide experience of more than 23 years serving Indian corporates and multinational clients in the field of direct taxation, international taxation, and exchange control activities. He specializes in devising inbound investment strategies for clients intending to invest in India. NC Hegde is a member of Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. With this short, the biodata is short, but all will realize after his session that his experience is vast. With this, we present Shri NC Hegde to all of you. I'll request Yatin Bhai. Momento, sir, get ticket. I request our President Yatin Bhai to present the memento on behalf of the chamber. Sir, over to you. Thank you.
So, good afternoon, friends. Good morning, good afternoon, sorry. Good to see such a large audience for a subject like FEMA and shows growing importance of FEMA today. As you know, FEMA is not as interesting probably as the Income Tax Act because we don't have too many interpretations and case laws on the subject. So, the only way you get to know about FEMA is that when you make a visit to the RBI and you probably learn that what you thought was right is not really right. So it is in that sense a little challenging. Even on important topics like whether who's a resident, non-resident as per FEMA, there is hardly any case law on the subject so as to kind of help you or guide you on possible views. One disadvantage of the income tax is that there are as many views as there are tribunals and court rulings on the subject. So it does confuse you a lot. But on FEMA, there is hardly any ruling. So you really don't get to an exposition of a law on the subject. First of all, let me thank the chamber. Chamber has always been very kind to me. The president, Mr. Bhatt, and all others who are here, and actually it's more like a friend and a family for me, and therefore I always love to come to any activity of the CITC because they have been actually doing a lot of sterling job in helping all of us professionals actually learn. And I think once you get an invitation to speak on a subject, it is the best form of learning. And I'm not saying that only as a cliche, it is really so because as I was preparing this presentation, there are a couple of schedules which actually came in only probably in the month of April. And when I looked at the policy, the FDI policy which was issued by the FIPB on 17th April, I suddenly noted that there was a schedule called Schedule 2A, which I had not noted, the schedule which related to the FPIs. And that suddenly made me wonder whether there was a schedule. I had to go back and see, and there indeed was a schedule of that sort. The LLPs also had come in pretty recently. So a lot of activity in the subject, a lot of changing, and I think that's what keeps you on in this particular subject. I think in the earlier session, Mr. Shabbir Motorwala has already covered, I think in great detail, FDI, which is the direct investment. What is the FDI or what is the long-term investment part of it? And what my job here is to cover the remainder, the residuary. So it's like if you take the Income Tax Act, it is like an income from other sources, other things other than what FDI has already been covered by Shabbir. I think I'll be proposing to take that. Naturally, it's not going to be as interesting as FDI in itself from a practitioner's point of view. It is certainly, there is a lot of complexity involved, but from a practitioner's point of view, maybe not as interesting. So if I give you a cricket analogy, it is after the first 6 overs are completed, then clearly the next players have to settle down because your fields are well spread and it becomes a little routine. So my emphasis is going to be to let you know the spirit behind the different legislation, behind the schedules, and what is it that you should be looking at, because after that, you really have to look at the schedule from time to time, and there are a lot of changes which keep on getting made in the schedule. So don't bother about that if you don't know everything really by rote or by memory. It is only thing that you need to really know what was the intention, what was the whole rationale behind. Because as I again go back to my earlier statement, unlike income tax, where you have a lot of exposition of law, there's no much exposition here. So whenever in doubt, probably look at the spirit. And if the spirit is appealing, maybe that is an interpretation which you would probably do be better with. Right, so what do I cover here? The foreign direct investment schedule 1 has already been covered. Everything other than that is something that I would like to cover. The foreign portfolio investments, investments on a non-repatriation basis, other investment schedule 5, which I won't cover in such great detail. I put that as an annexure in the schedule because it is largely related to debt securities and other securities which keep on getting added from time to time, and all these set of investors who are allowed to invest in it. So clearly the schedule will show you the all the securities which you are permitted to invest in, and that is quite comprehensive. So what I have done in the presentation is a little detailed and a little fat or too big, but the whole idea was to cover each and every aspect of the other than FDI in this, so that it becomes a self-contained document on its own. We look at foreign venture capital investment also, Indian depository receipts, and then finally QFIs. Foreign investments in LLP, I believe, has been covered by the earlier speaker again, but I'll make a reference to it, and the only reason I covered it here was because partnership firms were to be covered, and therefore LLP is in a way a partnership of sorts, at least under the Income Tax Act, and that is what I thought I should take up, right? And finally, some annexures which are reference, especially the reference to Schedule 5 and the various kind of securities that can be invested, and that is where your annexures will fit in place. Right, definition, I think you must have gone through this maybe in the earlier rounds. I believe you have already had several rounds, and a lot of this basic concepts which have been kind of reinforced, but only to give you a kind of a sequencing is that under the FEMA transfer of issue of security by a person resident outside India, again going back to the concept of FEMA and the structure, which again somebody must have mentioned, but under FERA the problem was that you had various sections, and in those sections you had to refer to a particular section. You had to go to section 9, section 19 and say a resident cannot do that, a non-resident cannot do that. But you then did not have really any place where you would find all the relevant provisions under one particular regulation. The best part about FEMA is that wherever they want to capture a particular regulation, that regulation is pretty much self-contained. So you have to only go into that particular regulation. For inbound investment, for example, you only need to look at the FEMA transfer or issue of a security by a person resident outside India. Once you look at that regulations and its schedules, then everything that is virtually involved with inbound investment is covered. Similarly, when you go to outbound investment, there is a separate regulation. So those regulations are self-contained, and you need to really look at those regulations, and you get everything under one particular regulation, as opposed to looking at different provisions of the Act and wondering where these provisions will apply, as was in the case of FERA. That then gives you a linkage by saying that an NRI shall have the meaning as foreign exchange management deposit regulations. It comes back to the same definition by a person who is a resident outside India, who is a citizen and who is a person of Indian origin. This is something again that you must have dealt, earlier speakers must have dealt with. Who is a PIO, a citizen of India, if he has any time held Indian passport. So here, as you must have probably heard the other speakers, the important concept which for the sake of emphasis or repetition, I would like to kind of point out is that there will be a resident and there will be a non-resident. Now, when you talk of non-resident, don't confuse yourself with the Income Tax Act, where a non-resident is defined purely by physical presence. If you are in India for a particular number of days, if you are outside India for a particular number of days, you are either a resident or a non-resident as per income tax. When it comes to FEMA, really, the term non-resident is a mix of both a physical presence as well as intention, which is combined. And if you look at FERA as opposed to FEMA, FERA only looked at intention purely without a physical reference. And when the FEMA bill was being passed, there was probably a move to shift it to completely physical presence, like in the Income Tax Act. So the Income Tax Act and FEMA would have probably been on par with each other. But probably there was some vested lobbies which intervened. And therefore, if you see now the provisions of FEMA in relation to a non-resident or a resident, and then of course non-resident is what is not a resident is a non-resident. Is a resident is a combination of both, a combination of physical presence. So there is first of all a presumption that if a person lives in India for 182 days, then he is a resident Indian. But that presumption can be disproved either if you have taken up an employment outside India or you are outside India for a particular period, and so on and so forth. Similarly, for a person who comes to India, it is presumed that he will become a resident, and then again if he has to disprove that particular intention. So it is a combination. In absence of any things, you go in default, and you go into default in the previous year. Have you stayed in India for 182 days or not? If yes, then you become a resident. So it is a combination of both. This is the important thing to note. And based on the definition of resident, you will have then different categories. There will be a resident. That means if you look at two categories I would refer to. One, a President Obama, he is also a non-resident under the Act. And then you will have another category of a person, Mr. L.N. Mittal, who is a non-resident but is a person of Indian origin, and hence he is a NRI and also can be called a PIO. So these are the two different categories, and clearly as and when the law was evolved, the emphasis was first that when India opened up, even before we opened up in 1991, right from the 80s, the emphasis was that there are a lot of patriotic Indians here outside India who want to invest into India, and let us make available opportunities to them so that India also benefits as well as these people also get an opportunity to invest, because probably outside India they don't get a return as good as they get in India. And therefore, if you ask people, different people, you will have different views on whether NRIs are patriotic or they are only selfish, and when rates are high they will come in. So that is not something that I want to get into. But the whole schemes in 1980 onwards have been designed after that, first of all, to encourage non-resident Indians and people of Indian origin to come and invest into India. And therefore, at that point of time, other than the category of a non-resident individual, you also had a body called the overseas corporate bodies, or bodies which were owned to the extent of 60% by these people of Indian origin. So the idea was, let us encourage Indians and bodies owned by them to invest into India. At that point of time, as you know, foreign investment was out of bounds, and for every foreign investment you had to go then to the FIPB, and it could take months, government, to make any investment into India. But then a small window was opened up by which non-residents could invest into certain sectors up to certain percentages, and that is how the entire regime opened up, and that is why the NRI schemes came into place. Apart from those NRI schemes, what were the other schemes at that point of time? Then there was a portfolio investment scheme, and I think when I start the portfolio investment scheme, I'll cover that in greater detail. Now, in terms of the law, what is the position of the law? Because we are all here accountants, we are lawyers, and we want to know what the law is. We don't want to go by common sense. So section 6(3)(b) is the governing section of FEMA. That says that without approval of RBI, with restriction of RBI, all these can be invested into India. And then based on that, the FEMA transfer or issue of security, as we saw, those regulations have been notified, and those are the regulations which really govern the provisions in relation to investment by non-residents. So that is, and these really have the force of the law. Then there are, in order to help us, there are circulars which are issued by the Reserve Bank from time to time which are called the ADMEA circulars. But if there was a circular and there was a notification and they were to contradict, and this happens very often, then the position under the law is that the notification would be more superior. And that was laid down way back in the 80s in a case called the Escorts case, Escorts versus LIC, where there was a takeover by a tycoon called Swaraj Paul. And at that point of time, this matter went up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said that circulars and all that is fine, but these are only instructions to authorized dealers. When it comes to the law, we will look at that point of time the FERA Act, and it's only the FERA Act which apply. We will not look at the ADMA circulars. However, unlike in income tax where you can challenge circulars by way of a writ, or circulars are not binding on tax authorities, it is not very easy to go and challenge ADMA circulars, even if sometimes they do not represent a correct piece of law. Or the FAQs, for example, a lot of angst which was caused by the circular in relation to the LERM scheme, where they said you cannot set up companies and things like that. Now that was clearly something which was not reflected in the law, but one has to often go and abide by those provisions only because of the fact that you have a Reserve Bank of India, and in a FEMA you don't want to take an aggressive position. You then come on to the industrial policy, the Department of Industrial Policy, which issues various press notes from time to time for guidance on various issues, and the Ministry of Commerce, who then finally, not to be left behind by RBI, because RBI started coming out with these half-year circulars, they also issue a circular every year, and the latest circular, as you may see, is the circular of 17th April, which lays down the entire comprehensive policy in relation to foreign direct investment. So this is only a repetition of what was mentioned earlier. Regulated by the RBI, Department of Industrial Policy Promotion is the mother body. This is the section 6(3)(b), which says that RBI has the power to restrict, prohibit, restrict or regulate the transfer or issue of any security. The regulations, the FEMA transfer issue of regulations. Good part in recent times is that there is a master circular which comes in every year. And that master circular is extremely helpful, drafted very well with by the Reserve Bank of India. It is a big challenge because if I don't know other speakers have made a mention or not, because very often what happens is that the government announces a particular policy, and that is often a knee-jerk reaction in response to a particular situation. So if there was a lot of pharma companies which are being acquired all of a sudden, then the government thought, no, this is not good, because we will have a problem with foreign pharma companies ruling the roost, and drugs and medicines will become very costly. So they went and issued a circular which said that for brownfield investment, it is no longer under the automatic route. You have to come to the FIPB for specific approval. Now, very often what happens is what they do is they don't do even consultation with the RBI. And as I mentioned, the notification or the changes in the regulations is ultimately the responsibility of the RBI. And that is where you will see the amendment made and the brownfield investment now being notified in a regulation coming virtually after 1.5 years probably. In the case of an LLP also, it comes in after probably 2 years or 3 years. 2011 FDI and LLP was notified, and the regulations in relation to FDI by the RBI, operationalizing them, have come in 2014. So that is why there is a disconnect. And RBI is very clear on the law. The ministry there is politically motivated at times. Therefore, they go ahead and declare whatever is the policy. But the RBI then officials have to work with the ministry to ensure that whatever they have said is then reflected in the regulation. And often there is a tussle between the two, which is the result why the circulars and the notifications by the RBI are issued after a considerable length of time, because ultimately they have to agree to whatever the ministry says, but they also want to ensure that there is clarity in the regulations. So you will always find regulations and circulars much more clarificatory than any position of the industrial policy really. Then this gives you a schematic representation, a diagrammatic representation. So what Shabbir covered was the first part, I suppose, the FDI and the Schedule 1. What we have here attempted to do, what I have attempted to do here is to look at the other piece, and we are really going to concentrate on the piece on the right hand side of the diagram. That is the investments by the LLPs, which is now Schedule 9, foreign portfolio investments, which are then divided into two buckets: the FII investments, the NRI PIO investments, and the RFPI investments, portfolio investors regulations. Then you have the foreign venture capital regulations, other investments which are covered by Schedule 5, IDRs, which of course may not be too relevant because this talk of foreign companies issuing depository receipts in India, opposite of what GDRs or ADRs is. If there was a reference made to ADRs and GDRs in the earlier lecture, this is exactly the opposite. This is IDRs, a foreign company listing depository receipts in India, and as you know, there's only one practical case of Standard Chartered Bank having issued the certificate, so I'm not going to spend too much of time on it. What I will do rather is spend more time on, from a practitioner's point of view, investment on a non-repatriation basis, because that does throw up some opportunities at times in terms of planning, and which is again covered by Schedule 4, and then there is the QFI and the NRI PIO. So this is an overall representation of the various schedules which are contained and which comprehensively cover everything that I have to say. With that, we now move on to portfolio investments, right? And they are contained in Schedule 2, 2A, and NRI PIO Schedule 3. Now, let me give you a little bit of flavor about portfolio investments. Portfolio investments are generally aimed at encouraging people to come in, and the whole idea there is to stabilize your equity markets, to stabilize monies which by its inherent nature is not there for a very long time, and where the investor does not really look at controlling interest in the company. So here he is really looking at a return of income. He is not really looking at having a say in the running of the enterprise, and that is what is really called as portfolio investment. A Chandrasekhar committee which was set up by the government in order to rationalize the different forms of portfolio investment, in fact suggested that portfolio investment be defined as anything which is below 10% be called as portfolio investment, but that definition has not yet come up. You will see that logic being extended in a lot of places because there is a 10% cap for all these investments, but that logic is that anything which is less than 10%, let's consider it as being as portfolio investment in nature. So you have three main buckets under the portfolio investment. One is the foreign institutional investor, the RFPI, and the NRI PIO. NRI PIO was the first one to start off the block. And again, in terms of history, again, as I said, to give you a little bit of background, this was when Rajiv Gandhi then was the Prime Minister, and at that point of time, or probably a little earlier than that, maybe Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister, and the thought was, let us get our NRIs and our OCBs to come and invest into our markets, the stock markets. And there was this portfolio investment scheme, and in terms of the portfolio investment scheme, you could have an OCB or the individual investing into the Indian stock markets, which at that point of time were only ruled and dictated by financial institutions like the LIC and the others who actually used to drive the market. The FIIs had not yet come into place that time. So an NRI or PIO could invest up to say 5%, 10%, 24% and so on and even more. And it was this 5% or 10% which was sought to be taken advantage of. You know, we accountants and lawyers are always creative or inventive, and we always see and tailor how these investments, what the investment limits were. And based on those investment limits, an aggressive takeover was made in relation to both Escorts and another company, I forget the name of the company, where Swaraj Paul wanted to actually control, and a hostile takeover in those days, there was no SEBI takeover code those days, and acquire control of the company, which again led to changes being made in the NRI PIO schedule, where these caps that you saw now came in, the 10%, the 24% all put together, and that was the origin of the NRI PIO. When it comes to the FII is, you know, after our liberalization, we invited FIIs to come to the market to broaden, and the whole theory or the premise was that FII investment is long-term investment. This is the investment by pension funds, other universities, superannuation funds, is going to be in India for a long time. This will help to stabilize markets. As we have all seen, that's not necessarily true. When there were IPOs which were being launched, FIIs used to invest on day one and take out the money on day two. So it doesn't become really a long-term investment, but the theory behind the entire FII investment is that this is really long-term investment. FIIs include AMCs, pension funds, mutual funds, investment trusts, and so on, as I just mentioned. RBI gives general permission to SEBI registered FIIs to invest in India under the portfolio investment scheme. So an application is first made by the FII to SEBI, and once SEBI gives you the approval, it also does a quick check with the RBI, and then there is a consolidated approval. There is no further need to make an application to the RBI, because that SEBI approval is the comprehensive approval. With that approval, then you go to the custodian. The custodian then asks you to also appoint a tax agent of sorts, and that is what a lot of us do for a living, some of our departments, where you compute those various trades in relation to investments made by FIIs from time to time. So SEBI is the nodal port of the FIIs. SEBI gives the permission to the FIIs, and it is based on this permission that the FIIs make the investments into the market. The new development which is now coming as a result of the foreign portfolio investment regulations is, the FPI regulation is, that FIIs, QFIs and all of them are sought to be aggregated into one, and they will all be called as foreign portfolio investors. Now this was to happen from 1st April, but I think banks have sought for some more time, and I believe now the FPI regulations which actually kick in from 1st June 2014. But till such time, FII regulations will continue. So these FII regulations now are going to have only a short period of life. But not to really worry, because the regulations of FPI are more or less on the same lines as that of a FII really, and the spirit is also very similar. So what is really the rules? The rule is that total shareholding of either an FII or a sub-account shall not exceed 10% of the paid-up capital of the company, or 10% of the paid-up capital of the debenture of each series, the convertible debenture here. Because convertible debentures, as you know, compulsory convertible debentures, a reference may have been made in the earlier lecture, they are treated as equity for the purpose of FDI. Then the second condition is that total holding of all FIIs and sub-account of FIIs cannot exceed 24% of the paid-up capital. This is only to ensure that FIIs really don't get into a block and into concert with other foreign investors under the direct investment route and capture the equity of a company more than whatever is desired in that particular sector as such. The limit of 24% can be increased by the concerned company by passing a special resolution. So if you have a company, and this earlier used to be a very popular mode, if a company had made private placement to FIIs or was open to investment by FIIs, then normally what would have happened was that they were sending a signal that I am ready to accept higher standards of corporate governance, I am much better in managing my affairs, and therefore if an placement to an FII would automatically mean a jump probably in the share prices of the company. So then after taking that, you could also decide that, look, I am also going, because 24%, and if you are a company which has a lot of investor appetite, 24% may not be enough for a lot of companies. So companies like HDFC and others also went out and said, no, we will pass a board resolution by which the 24% can be increased to maybe 74% or as the case may be. In those days, the foreign cap on banks was not there, and financial institutions were not there. The NBFC regulations came in a little later, and hence there was this possibility for HDFC, like similarly many other companies said, now I am now resolving by way of a general resolution to increase the stake to whatever it may be, 24 to 74 or 24 to 100% as the case may be. That means that they are welcoming FII investment to the extent of the FII. Of course, your headroom for other foreign investors will considerably reduce, but this was something that was possible. But the scheme said, the scheme goes by the fact that you have to conduct all your transactions through a registered broker. Then the next point was that, as I said, it became fashionable for companies to issue to FIIs prior to an IPO, because that again sent a signal that this is a company in which FIIs, after doing their due diligence and scrutiny, want to invest in. It often led to the IPO being subscribed or having greater chances of success. Just like probably if you put up a candidate who is very well acceptable, and since we are in a post-election or election scenario, it gives you a better feeling, and projecting a particular candidate has probably given a better party a better chance at the polls. Similarly, if you were to make a private placement to the FII, then to that extent there was this better chances of the IPO getting subscribed. So the rules were, earlier you had to go to the RBI for every such private placement. Then the rule was relaxed by saying that even if you were to make a private placement, then you could go to the, this could be under the automatic route. But the only point is that the pricing guidelines, because once it was really opened up and no permissions were required from the RBI, only thing that was put in place was the pricing guidelines. And in case of a public offer, whatever was being offered to the residents, you had to price it at least at that particular price. And in case of a private placement, you had to relate to the SEBI or the DCF guidelines. At that point of time, it was the CCI value. Now it is the SEBI or the DCF method. And as you probably know, in terms of the new RBI policy, they are probably saying that we will do away with the pricing guidelines, even with DCF and all others. So we'll have to await an official announcement to that effect, official change in the notification to that effect. But this is something which was possible. For an FII, a short selling or borrowing of securities has been permitted in terms of the guidelines. And after you make your investments, then clearly you can repatriate whatever monies that you have made in relation to those investments back home. A special rupee account has to be opened, which the SEBI in its consolidated approval gives you the permission for, and then you can repatriate that amount. In terms of reporting, the entire investment in relation to FII, the responsibility has been thrust on the authorized dealer, because the authorized dealer or the custodian are the ones who are really in touch with the FII and the broker, and therefore the entire responsibility has been placed on them. They have to then give this report from time to time, and that is an onerous responsibility, because you have to ensure that whatever is the FII investment is within those various caps that we saw in the earlier slide. So that entire thing, the onus is on them. I made a mention of that that once the FPI regulations have been notified, FII regulations will stand repealed. However, till 1st June, the FII regulations, at least in terms of the RBI's scheme, if you have an application between now to 1st June, they will still process it under the FII regulations. And after that, three type of investors, portfolio investment, the QFIs and the FIIs will all come into one and be called as FPIs, because FPIs could also have a third category, which are sovereign funds and other funds, and therefore that is proposed to be broad-based. In terms of income tax, as you know, you have a special section on 115 AD which governs the tax in relation to FII, the trades, the purchase and sales that they make. Other than the fact that you can rely on the tax treaty, and you may take a position that I'm only a trader in shares, I don't have a PE in India, that position is probably likely to die down soon. But you have your provisions. Similar provisions will have to be made, or instead of the FII, an FPI will also have to be notified in order to give effect to the provisions of the Income Tax Act to the FPI regulations also. This is a new schedule which has come in very recently in 2014, and which is to give effect to the SEBI FPI regulations. And here again, as you will see, as I mentioned, FPI and RFPI is only old wine in a new bottle. So what was FII and some others is now an RFPI, and therefore the principle in relation to the holding of investment is more or less the same. So the 10%, each RFPI will have 10%. Total holdings of all RFPIs together cannot exceed 24%. Amount of consideration has to be coming from abroad, and then you have a foreign currency account. The custodian and the banker will then allow you to repatriate whatever monies you have made in relation to portfolio investments that you have made. What are the eligible securities? Purchase of shares and convertible debentures. Now we then move on to NRIs. The NRI portfolio investment scheme and purchase of shares and convertible debentures. And as I explained to you earlier, this was the first category of investors which was given the benefit of accessing the stock markets under the portfolio investment scheme. So you have purchase of shares and convertible debentures through the stock exchange. It could be either on a repatriation basis or on a non-repatriation basis. One would wonder that if I can do it on a repatriation basis, why would I want to do it on a non-repatriation basis? But you must understand that when these regulations came in, as I told you, they came in much prior to 1991, and at that point of time, a lot of investment was really on a non-repatriation basis, because the government was not very confident about the rupee and its flight, and hence they said, okay, you can come in, but your capital will get blocked to that extent, and therefore the investment will be on a non-repatriation basis. Now it seems a little funny that if I have an opportunity to invest on a repatriation basis, why would I choose a non-repatriation basis? But the origin of this is as I said, this has come way back in 83, 84, and that's why it still continues to be there on the statute. Each NRI can purchase up to 5% of the paid up value or 5% of the value convertible of each series, and in case of all NRIs put together, the limit will be extended to 10%. Just like in the case of an FII, this limit can be increased by the company concerned to 24%, and the NRIs, but unlike an FII, who can, as we saw, do short selling, in a case of an NRI, he can only purchase and sell the shares on a delivery basis. There is a responsibility for reporting these transactions to the authorized dealer through whom this portfolio investment scheme is being operated. And it is an onerous responsibility, because that AD will then have the responsibility of telling the RBI what your percentage of investment is. And very often you will see circulars which will say and tell the authorized dealers that please do not allow any of your constituents to make investments in ABC Pharma Company, because it has already reached, the investment has already reached 22%, 21%. So they want to ensure that the 24% limit is not breached. And that is where this 24%, the authorized dealer has a responsibility. He in turn has to send all these reports of investments made by the NRI to the Reserve Bank from time to time. If you want to invest on a repatriable basis, non-repatriable basis, you can do that with your NRO accounts as well. And that is probably an avenue where somebody has a bank account lying here, wants to invest into the stock market. He can use the NRO account, because NRO, as you know, is always identified with non-repatriation. And then he can purchase and sell, and on that basis, whatever is the amount which can be repatriated based after deduction of taxes and with the permission of the authorized dealer can be repatriated. You then have purchase and sale of shares or convertible debentures by NRIs on a non-repatriation basis. I made a reference to this when I was talking of a repatriation basis, by saying that why would somebody now want, in the current scenario when you can have a repatriation which is being allowed, and because here then the money can only be invested into the NRO account. But if you do not want your foreign funds to be used and you want your rupee funds to be used, then maybe this may be a good way of using the portfolio investment scheme on a non-repatriation basis, because ultimately if the money which is credited to an NRO account, you also have this window of $1 million that you can repatriate every year. So if you are going to make good returns out of monies which are lying here in India, that money can go into the NRO account, and ultimately from the NRO account you can repatriate that $1 million every year. So probably that is the only reason why there may still be an attraction for investment by an NRI on a non-repatriation basis. There are some prohibitions here, and these prohibitions you will find in a couple of regulations where investment is allowed on a non-repatriation basis, and that is to do with a chit fund or a Nidhi company. Mind you, it is only for real estate business and not real estate development really. Construction may not fall within this term of real estate business, and other than that there is agriculture, plantation and TDR, which is generally not, which is out of bounds for foreign investment. We then move on to other investments, what is called Schedule 5. And as I said, I will not really take you through these other investments in great detail. It is mentioned there in the annexure, because for again the investors that we have already spoken of in the past, the FIIs, the QFIs, the NRIs, the RFPI, sorry, QFIs we haven't spoken of, but we will come to that later. All these, the window for investing in government securities, debt securities, ARC paper and all others is really regulated by Schedule 5. So earlier when we looked at Schedules 2, 2A, 3, 3 and 4, they were talking of investments in equity or equity linked other instruments like convertible debentures, which is treated as equity for the purpose of FDI. But when it comes to Schedule 5, Schedule 5 permits these type of investors. Again, the overriding point is that in terms of the SEBI and the RBI policy, which may fluctuate from time to time. So if you can always have, if the government feels that you are in a position to absorb more debt into the economy, they may free up the debt window and increase the amount of investment, which they keep on doing from time to time. Now they say that this amount of billion which was available to FIIs for investing in debt securities is now increased from 10 billion to 20, 20 to 30 and so on. And therefore by that micromanagement control, they can control the amount which goes into debt securities. For investment, they are not really bothered because they are welcoming foreign investment to come into India. But debt securities obviously comes in with a price, because you are getting a rate of return. That rate of return and that investment can be sent outside India. And whenever there is a pressure on the rupee, they would like to try and control this debt window. Whenever the rupee is appreciating significantly, the window will therefore be opened up or relaxed. And that is again a point of view that you will see across regulations. The LERM scheme, which was earlier $25,000, was extended to $200,000 in somewhere in 2007-8, because at that point of time the rupee had started appreciating and had come down to as much as 39 rupees to the dollar. And that's why they immediately liberalized the LERM scheme and said you can send up to $200,000 per family member, thereby encouraging people to invest outside. Last year when we saw the run on the rupee and the rupee went up to 65 and more than 65, they immediately clamped and put clamps and have brought down the LERM scheme than the limits thereon. Similarly, in terms of debt securities also, what the government and the RBI does from time to time is that they restrict or they increase depending upon the whatever is with the position in relation to the rupee. So you have FII. Within Schedule 5, there is a para 1 which lays down what are the debt securities that an FII can invest in. In relation to QFI, you have a para 1A, para 1B, and the latest, which is the one relating to the RFPI, which was just announced this month, and that is para 1C. Then we move on to the next schedule, and that is the schedule relating to foreign venture capital investments. A foreign venture capital investor is an investor who is incorporated and established outside India and who wants to make investments in venture capital funds. So really, when you looked at the overall scheme of investment in India, you had an FDI, and then there was this FII, you had NRIs and somebody, NRIs as you know can come into the FDI as well. Everybody can really come into an FDI route directly if they want to play a part in actually the running of a company or any other enterprise. But you also had FIIs which came in only for earning a rate of return on investments or stock exchange or wherever it is in the in listed companies. Then you had the NRI scheme where again NRIs were allowed to make and invest into Indian companies, and the now RFPI which consolidates all those. Over and above that, as the economy started becoming mature, there was a demand by private equity players that also allow us a regime by which we can invest into Indian securities through a kind of a single window, and that was what was called as the foreign venture capital investor regulations. This is something which is governed by SEBI. Again, here if you see in the regulations of the RBI have not really kept in pace with those of SEBI, because under SEBI, all these are now part of what is called as alternative investment fund regulations, and those regulations have been notified. However, if you see schedules of FEMA, there is still a reference to venture capital fund, which is probably not existing anymore as in terms of SEBI. That gets merged into a category of an AIF. So AIF has 3 categories, out of which one category is a venture capital fund. So that is sometimes that you will get confused by why is this AIF, why somewhere it is mentioned foreign venture capital regulations. But as I said, there is often a time between RBI regulations and between SEBI, so the SEBI and the government, and that is where there is this mismatch which often happens. Foreign venture capital investor regulations, important to note that in spite of the FVCI regulations, there may be a lot of large private equity players which may still want to come into India, not only through the foreign venture capital investor regulations, they may want to come into India directly invest into India through the FDI route, or they may even prefer an FII route. And therefore, what typically a large number of these private equity funds do is that they have an entity outside India and they set up entities as an FII, as an FDI, and as an FVCI as well, because you never know which regulation may help in which direction. As you may see in the case of an FVCI regulation, the 2-3 important points why a person would want to come in through an FCI regulation is, one, that there is no guidelines in relation to the pricing, and that becomes very important, because for a foreign private equity investor, if he has invested into a company and there is probably an assured rate of return which has been kind of agreed upon and he wants to exit, then if you have a DCF coming into play or any other regulation coming into play, that really impacts his exit route. And as you know, an VCF or a private equity is here only for helping a company earning a rate of return and getting out. And that is why that flexibility is given by the FVCI regulations, that if you come in through the FVCI route and you are regulated by this particular schedule, then you don't have what is the pricing guidelines which otherwise apply to foreign direct investors. But if you come through the FVCI route, there may be some restrictions on certain sectors which you cannot really invest in. On the other hand, in the FDI, you can come in very freely into the sectors depending whatever the sector cap is. So you can come into a real estate sector if you are ready to have a project, invest in a project which has a minimum amount of acreage, which has minimum amount of capitalization. If you are ready to fulfill all that, you can come directly through the FDI route. If you are looking at investments in India, you can use an FVCI route in order to get the flexibility not only in relation to the pricing. Another important flexibility is that they don't have to hold those shares, which is a lock-in which is stipulated for promoters 1 year after the IPO. So that again is not required for an FVCI if you come in via the FCI regulation. So a couple of these and some other procedural matters really then prompt these private equities and venture capital funds to set up not only an FDI company, maybe Singapore, Mauritius as the case may be, also an FVCI company, and very often they also have an FII company. And why FII? Because at times now people have started using the FII route for investing into debt of an Indian company. Listed NCDs are allowed if an Indian company issues them to an FCD, which is like in a form of debt being given to a real estate player. And therefore, they will have all these three, depending upon the transaction in India and whatever works the best, they would want to use either the entity which is registered under the FVCI regulation, the entity which is a pure FDI entity, or an entity which is registered under the FII regulations. So this is the broad picture in relation to the FVCI regulation. A venture capital undertaking, you must understand, is the entity in which the investment is made. So if you have read in the papers that a Blackstone has made an investment in CMS Operations, then CMS Operations here is the entity which is the venture capital undertaking, or the IVCU, which is the undertaking. A venture capital fund, as I mentioned, is defined under the regulation, but under the AIF now, under the alternative investment fund regulations, a venture capital fund becomes one of the three categories of funds, and therefore there is no concept now of a venture capital fund under the AIF regulations. It gets subsumed within an AIF, and therefore at times I have made a reference to either AIF or a venture capital fund. If you note, in terms of the venture capital fund definition, and a venture capital fund need not be only owned by a foreign company. You may have players like ICICI, Kotak and all others who want to float a venture capital fund in order to raise monies and then invest in investments. And therefore, as far as the VCF is concerned, it can be a domestic VCF or an FVCI which has wanted to invest in these VCFs. This is the latest development on the AIF, which I already did mention. This is from SEBI. This you will not find under the FEMA regulations, but clearly the AIF of Fabulators, ESOPs and all those which are meant for a special purpose will not be considered as alternative investment funds. Venture capital fund, as I already discussed, the regulation definition in FEMA is a little different from the AIF, and I am sure that FEMA also will make amendments soon. Venture capital undertaking, I made a reference to this, that this is, as I gave you the example, a CMS, an investment by a Blackstone into a CMS. CMS is what is called the venture capital undertaking. Interesting point here which now arises and which has been a controversy over the years is that when the FVCI regulations came in and when SEBI allowed an FVCI to be registered, as we see here, in terms of the SEBI regulations, you are allowed to probably invest in most sectors other than the non-banking finance, gold financing and other activities which are not permitted under industrial policy of the government of India. However, when people started making applications to the RBI and to the government, what they often saw was that the RBI and the government used to give them approvals and restricting the investment only to 9 or 10 specified sectors. Now, where did these 9 or 10 sectors come from? This came from the provisions of section 1023 FB of the Income Tax Act, where, as you know, an income of a venture capital fund is exempt if investments are made into venture capital undertakings and the various rules of the income tax are fulfilled. Income tax, there was an amendment made and they said that if you make an investment only in these sectors, we will give you the benefit under 1023 FB. Somehow taking a cue from that, the government and the RBI also only started allowing investments made in these sectors which were possible under the FVCI regulations and not others. It had no legal basis or sanction. But that's the way FEMA often operates. It is like Dadagiri. If the government says, this is what I want to do, or the RBI says, then you really don't have an option because they are the person who is giving you the regulation there. Funny part is, after in 2012, the Finance Act 2012, those restrictions in 1023 FB were done away with by the Income Tax Act, based on a representation made by the venture capital fund and the investors, by saying that you cannot restrict us only to these particular sectors, because otherwise what started happening was that you had to have a foreign venture capital which was only dedicated to these 9 sectors. So I talked of 3, then there had to be a 4th entity which had to be registered, one which was in the 1023 FB sectors and one which was other than the 1023 FB sectors. So things became more and more complicated, and the pass-through mechanism which was conceived under the Income Tax Act was not being fulfilled, and hence under Income Tax Act amendments were made, but these have not been really carried through. There is a lack of clarity. Now, as I understand, they are allowing it, but again they are subject to their own interpretations. In some recent cases they said you will not be allowed to invest into real estate. Maybe the logic is, as we see here, industrial policy. And under the industrial policy in force, if you want to get into a real estate project, there has to be a commitment for minimum capitalization as well as a particular acreage or area of project that has to be developed, and that venture capital, necessarily the project may not be satisfying, and an investment in a company which has several projects will be difficult to monitor. So RBI and the government have been saying we will not allow you to invest in those sectors. The SEBI venture capital funds regulations stand repealed and they now get reflected into the AIF. I did make a reference to that. This is essentially the regulatory framework. The SEBI foreign venture capital investor regulations, the SEBI alternative fund regulations, and the investment by registered FVCI under FEMA. So under FEMA there is this schedule that we spoke of, Schedule 6, which governs whatever it is. Reference is made to venture capital fund, maybe a little otiose now in view of the AIF regulations, but that is the way of the scheme of the Act. What can an FVCI do? An FVCI can invest into equity instruments, debt instruments. That is all contained within Schedule 6. But what Schedule 6 doesn't say, and what the government policy of 2014 says, which has come in April 17, 2014, that they can also contribute to 100% of the capital, which is okay, and they can set up a domestic asset management company to set up a fund. So this is something which has learned only as a result of the FDI policy, which was probably not there in clearly black and white in the schedule. But that's why, as I said, you have to read the policy of the FDI and the RBI circular and the schedule, all three put together. Remember, the schedule is really the law, but the policy now says this, and hopefully RBI also in the course of time will amend the regulation to reflect this. A SEBI registered FVCI can also invest into a domestic venture capital fund. If the venture capital is open for resident investors, it can also be open for non-resident investors. A SEBI registered FVCI which has got approval from the RBI can then invest into this. That would be regulated by the RBI regulation and the policy. FVCIs are also allowed to invest into eligible securities and debt securities, again in terms of Schedule 6, which is specified. There is a reference made to the annexure. And of course, registered FVCIs can also make investments directly into the stock exchange. And as you know, a lot of foreign private equity investors have invested into pipe deals. Most of them in the last few years have only made investments into listed entities because the rate of return there probably was better, and they have an easy exit route as opposed to a listed company, and where probably the valuations that were being demanded or the amounts that were being demanded by Indian promoters was too high in comparison to what the private equity capital investors wanted. And that is why there are a lot of these pipe deals, as they are called, which means investment into the stock exchange on securities which is in the stock exchange. And therefore you must have read of many private equity investors, they may invest up to 20% and so on within the limits of whatever is the SEBI takeover code law at that point of time, because they don't want to breach the SEBI takeover code and make an open offer. So they would try and see that that investment that they make is both within the SEBI takeover code and also designed to give them a return. Payment has to be made from inward remittances. A forward cover is permitted. As I said, the highlight of the FVCI really is the departure from the normal schedule, which is the requirement of having to sell shares at the discounted cash flow method. So that is one of the main incentives or sweeteners for a person to come in and register as an FVCI, apart from that 1 year lock-in period which is available for an FVCI. We then move on to Indian depository receipts. And Indian depository receipts, as I said, it really deals with receipts which could be made in the Indian stock exchange. So take an example of an American depository receipt. So what happens, an Indian company issues the shares. So the underlying capital is the Indian share capital. Against those shares, there is a depository receipt which is created by a banker in any of your jurisdictions, maybe Luxembourg, UK, or wherever the case may be. And those depository receipts, which become virtually like an instrument, are then issued to non-resident investors who don't invest into Indian capital but invest into depository receipts outside India. Those depository receipts are then freely traded. Under the Income Tax Act, transfers of those depository receipts are not taxable by a specific exemption under 47, and therefore depository receipts trading again helps non-resident investment, because the underlying share capital is actually flows back to the Indian company and is a way of attracting investment. There was probably a demand for foreign companies also to tap the Indian markets. And therefore, this probably was created, and there was only one issue, as I said, which I am aware of, the Standard Chartered issue, which has gone in for an IDR, where Standard Chartered Bank, which is probably a company which is based in the UK, has listed these depositories, the IDRs, in India. They are, as you see, if you see on the stock market quotes, you can see a SCB IDR being there. Other than that, this has not been a very popular route, but this is a route for foreigners if you have a booming stock markets. And again, if the stock markets, there was probably a report I read that the stock market may hit 40,000, then maybe there may be other greedy investors who may want to come in and start issuing investors. Probably they feel that if the Indian markets will become too hot or too hot to handle, then maybe in comparison, if foreign companies' receipts maybe probably give a better rate of return or on investment. You then move on to what is called a QFI, or a qualified foreign investor. Now, who is a QFI? As we saw earlier, and that is the reason I made this distinction between an Obama and an Ellen Mittal. You had the portfolio investment scheme, but the portfolio investment scheme was only available to people like Ellen Mittal and an OCB set up by him. If a George Bush or an Obama decided to invest into India by saying that probably India will give me better returns than investing in a fixed deposit receipt in the US, then he was not really allowed any particular route unless he came in, he got in, a lot of people came through an FII, came through an FII sub-account and then invested into India. Or as you see the FPAFI or whatever it is, FII, FPI. So there was no way by which these people could actually invest into the stock markets. NRIs were allowed, NRIs of Indian origins were allowed, those who were citizens of India, maybe father, grandfather, whatever, they were allowed, but a foreigner per se could not invest. And you know, foreigners have an appetite. In the chapter relating to immovable properties, you will see how a lot of foreigners or Germans have a lot of liking for investment in houses in Goa, for example, or in Kochi or in Pondicherry, where there is a huge amount of appetite for investments in those places. Similarly, there was a demand that now it is time to even broaden the markets and to allow QFIs to come in and invest into India. And the QFIs therefore refer to a much broader category of investors, a foreigner who is neither a citizen of India, has no other economic links with India, a pure foreigner but who wants to invest and earn returns from India. Again, on notification of the SEBI FPI regulations, which I said will come into effect from 1st June 2014, the QFI also will become a category which will be governed within those regulations of AIF, will become a subcategory of an AIF, and therefore to that extent these regulations also will have to be amended or merged even under the FEMA regulations. Like in the case of an NRI scheme, the basic philosophy is the same, that 5% of a company is something that you can invest up to for each individual basis, and as an aggregation this cannot exceed 10% of the paid up capital of an Indian company. Important point to note is that this is over and above the FII and NRI. So you can have the FII all put together 24%, you can have NRI all put together depending on all 10%, and then can go up to 24% if so decided. And then you can have a QFI which can again go up to 10%. So subject to the sector policy in force, and again QFI is the reporting mechanism and the depository which is now contemplated, which is going to be doing all this reporting to the RBI, will have to keep this track in place, that by a combination of all these methods, that the Indian investment in the foreign investment in the Indian company doesn't exceed whatever is contemplated under the FDI scheme as per the industrial policy. You then move on to foreign investments in LLP. I think a reference probably was already made by Shabir in the earlier section, so I don't think I will deal with it at such great length, but I think suffice to say LLP has emerged as a very attractive option now for foreign investors, and the reasons are not very difficult to know why, because an LLP, as you know, has, if you have an LLP, it may, and the LLP, as you see the conditions, an LLP investment in LLP is permitted in areas where 100% FDI is allowed. And 100% FDI is normally allowed in all services sector and all other sectors, the software, IT enabled, and many other sectors, manufacturing, where there is 100% FDI allowed. You can have an LLP and you can invest into that LLP up to 100% easily. The advantage in the services sector is that if you are dealing with a related enterprise, and for BPO and KPO operations, and if you have a captive R&D center, you will, under Income Tax Act, you will be required to charge on the basis of what is called a cost plus. So based on safe harbor regulations or whatever regulations you may have, you will have a cost plus 17, 18, 20, 23, whatever your tax officer may decide. And today, as you have seen in the papers, Economic Times, they are talking of tax terrorism. And these companies and these entities have always been subject to tax terrorism now for the last 6 or 7 years, because starting from a cost plus 5 they wanted to, they've been asked to sometimes pay up on a cost plus 35, cost plus 40, or whatever tax officer may so choose. And then he may drive home a lot of points to say that why you should charge that high amount. Sorry to digress, coming back to the subject. As a result of this markup, what will happen is that over a years, your cash buildup will keep on increasing. And any attempt to send this money out will entail an additional dividend distribution tax. So when you want to send this money, effectively what will happen, you will have a tax rate to be paid, a DDT to be paid, not sure on whether the DDT will be allowed in the other country as a credit. And therefore your effective tax rate goes to as high as 43%. So form an LLP. In an LLP, once you have the investment made, LLP makes the profits even on a cost plus basis. The share of profit is exempt in the hands of the partner, section 10(2)(a), and therefore this money can go in and you will have a much lower incidence of tax, and that is why LLP has become popular among foreign investors. People were still waiting and watching, saying that is government allowing FDI in LLPs or not. But over the last 2-3 years, there have been cases of LLPs, not too many really, but there have been cases of LLPs where foreign investment has been allowed. There also have been cases which we have dealt with, where not only LLPs, investment in foreign currency LLPs, foreign investment LLPs has been allowed, some companies have also been allowed conversion into LLPs, and we have gone to the FIPB to say, I am converting this from a company to an LLP, please allow me that, and the FIPB has allowed that as being permissible. So the LLP has thrown up these various permutations and combinations. The LLPs are, as I said, allowed in the 100%, wherever the 100% FDI is allowed. I have given a reference in the Annexure A on what the FDI policy is. Shabir must have already covered it in the earlier session. There are some restrictions on some of those sectors where an LLP investment cannot be made, investment in LLP cannot be made, which I have put down here. The plantation agricultural print media is very typical. The important point in relation to the LLP, which is now clarified as a result of the RBI notification in March 2013, is this concept of capital of an LLP and a profit share, and how do you value what is the interest in a partnership or of the LLP, what is an interest in the LLP. And until now there was no guidance on, in the case of a company, the position was very clear that when you invested in and a non-resident invested in, you have to at least invest at the DCF value. Anything lesser than that will not be permitted. When you wanted to go out, you had to at least ensure that the value was lower than the DCF value, because the whole idea is to protect the interests of India, that when a person comes into India, you don't give him a share at a value which is lower than the market value, such that he doesn't come in today and ask for the same money to be returned tomorrow by selling the share of the company. So I have come in at 10 rupees, if the DCF value is 20, I come in at 10, tomorrow I can demand 20 rupees, and therefore 10 rupees you would have immediately benefited. And that's why the logic of putting in DCF when you come into the country, taking any amount, but not more than the DCF. So if you want to be a kind Samaritan and you want to kind of gift it or sell it at a lower price to a resident Indian, that is welcome, but anything above that is clearly not welcome, and that's the logic. And that same logic is built into the FDI in LLP as well. So depending upon your structuring, and it is very important to position what you want to do at times. And that reminds me of a joke, how do you structure things, and reminds me of a joke of two beggars. Now these two beggars, as they were, these beggars were based in London. And there was a beggar A and a beggar B, and very often as a matter of strategy, they used to go and be at different points of time to beg. Probably because in order to increase their earnings as such. And beggar A used to come in, and he used to come in, but whatever his intake of earnings was only reasonably limited. On the other hand, beggar A was surprised to see that beggar A used to come in with a lot of earnings and a lot of 10-pound notes. And soon the man was in a position to acquire a car as well as a mortgage-free house and things like that. And so beggar A was very surprised. He asked beggar B, what is the real strategy? What is it that you are doing differently than I am, as a result of which you are able to increase your daily earnings? So beggar A said that, let me ask you, what have you said, or what board do you hold, or what placard do you hold when you are begging? So the man says, I hold a placard which is intended to appeal to everyone to give me alms, which says that I am a poor man, I have a wife and 4 children to support, please give me some money. Okay? He says, see, this is where my strategy is different. He says, I am holding a placard which says, I only need this extra 10 pounds to return to Pakistan, and people are very happily donating it to me. So it is a question of strategy. How do you actually place yourself in order to, whether an LLP, a company, FSCI and all that, as you saw from time to time. Just like in the case of a company and the transfer of shares, a transfer of shares from a resident to a non-resident, the consideration has to be the fair price. Now this fair price again will throw up challenges for a chartered accountant, but it is very typical of government and RBI to do that. They always want to leave all this to a chartered accountant without giving you any guidance. So even on the DCF method, there was no guidance. Then we came in and we were slapped with all the share capital controversy, the premiums, and having issued it at lower values. DCF values were different. Now the tax officer wants to take the best in the DCF value to see that the highest price was charged to a non-resident related party. At times when they don't find that very convenient, then they will go to the NAV value, as we see in the case of Vodafone 3, which went to the Bombay High Court. There they took the value as per net asset value and not as per the DCF value. So depending on whatever suits them, they will have, and therefore the challenge will be here. What they have said is any international methodology, and therefore the institute will have to now come out with some kind of guidance in terms of how do we really value the partnership interest in an LLP, because depending on what you invest and when you want to get out or you want to get in, all this is something that is going to be relevant. Reporting, they have now designed a form, and that reporting has to be within 30 days, and I think also the guidance is that for all the LLP which has flowed in from 2011 till today, you have now to do it within a particular period of time. For disinvestment, like in the case of form TRS, there is something which has to be reported within 60 days. Important point in case of LLP is that a downstream investment, if a company is having LLP, is having foreign investment, it cannot indulge in downstream investment. And if you are having any, if you want to, if you are a company which is which has got a foreign investment and you are majority foreign owned, then you can invest downstream into an LLP. But the condition is that that entity. So suppose, let's take for example, I have a company A which is already set up in India, which is 100% owned by a foreign company. That company wants to become a partner of an LLP. That is possible provided that company A and the LLP B are operating in sectors which are allowed under the 100% route. And the way the regulation, one regulation says says allowed, and it seems that is freely allowed. But if you see the other regulation says that whenever you want to make an investment in an LLP, either directly or indirectly, And this would be something which would be indirect, because you have a company in between A, and that company is then making a downstream investment in the LLP. It would be a form of indirect investment. There they say that you have to go back to the FIPB. And that is why, on a harmonious reading, if a company wants to make this kind of a downstream investment into an LLP, they will have to go back to the FIPB. Then I think we then come towards, as I end, I come towards the end of this particular topic, is an investment in proprietorship and partnership concerns and others. And it is interesting that this doesn't form part of the FEMA transfer or issue of security regulations. This is rather contained in FEMA investment in firm or proprietary concern in India regulations 2000. So to that extent, what I mentioned earlier, there is this particular departure. I mentioned that under FEMA, life has been made easy, that you only have to look at a self-contained regulation and not go any further for looking at other kinds of investment. But this is where I am proved wrong, because if you want to look at investment in a proprietary concern or a firm in India, that's not contained in that regulation, it is rather contained in the FEMA regulations. And the logic for that is the same logic, that this window for investment in a firm in India was opened up way before 1991 for NRIs. So just like NRI investment into a company on a non-repatriation basis, investment into a firm on a non-repatriation basis was opened up much before the FDI route was opened up for foreigners, and hence this is a regulation which has continued to be there since that point of time. Because when they enacted FEMA, they said everything that was contained in FERA will actually only become much better. You can't have any scheme which was available to you which will put you into a worse position, into a far more precarious position. So based on that logic, the logic is that this really continues. So in terms of this particular scheme, the investment in partnership firm proprietary scheme, an NRI or a PIO can make an investment by way of a contribution to a firm, both on a non-repatriation basis, not both, only on a non-repatriation basis. Amount can come in from it can come in from an NRE account. If you want to use foreign funds, it can come in from an NRO account. If you have rupee funds and you want to use rupee funds, the conditions are the firm should not be engaged in agricultural plantation activities, which is there all across. Not something in the real estate business, that is only dealing in land and immovable property, or earning income thereon, or the print media sector. Now, why am I highlighting this? Why am I going through this in so much of detail? Because this has often a question which is posed is that because of this, is there a window of opportunity that you may have your NRI client investing into maybe real estate development and construction, or a retail business or any other business which is not really open up for foreign investors, but can be open to a non-resident Indian in terms of this scheme. Because as you see, the scheme only limits 3 or 4 other activities. No other activities are limited, and there is no reference made to the industrial policy. And the FEMA transfer issue of security regulations may have a reference to the industrial policy, but the FEMA proprietary concern regulations 2000 don't have any reference to the policy. So if you were to ask a judge to read it, he will interpret the law as it is, and he'll say the regulation is very clear that you can clearly invest in any sector other than these 4 which have been listed. Point is, yes, non-repatriation basis, but the point is you can invest into a particular sector, your capital becomes non-repatriable, your principal becomes non-repatriable, but all your incomes, as you know and as you have heard over the days, are all current account transactions. So any incomes arising from those investments become freely repatriable, and even if they were to be put in an NRO account, it can again be freely repatriable because of the $1 million route. So an NRI or a PIO may find this attractive to come in to make investment in India through this route, is the major point that I wanted to highlight, and that is the reason I have highlighted this investment in partnership firm or a proprietary concern. On the other hand, if you want repatriation benefits, the policy is very clear. They say you will have to go to the Reserve Bank of India and take prior permission of the RBI. And there is also the policy, the consolidated policy says in consultation with the government of India. And when you put these two together, it means you are easily set back by a period of 1 year minimum. Because for those of you who have had an occasion to have a liaison office or a representative office, which is referred by the RBI to the government, it clearly puts you back by 6 months. So you should never be careful before advising your clients by saying a liaison or representative office can be opened in 3 weeks. It also depends upon the sector concerned, because in certain key sectors, and that sector again according to the whims of the government keeps on getting expanded, they may send you back to the Ministry of Finance, and there your files will then lie for 6 months or a year. So that is where you have to be careful here. For repatriation benefits, you want it, you have to be ready for the long haul. But in theory, possible, but possible with permission of RBI in consultation of the RBI. What about other entities? What about investment in other entities? What about trusts, for example? Trusts for a VCF specifically permitted under that particular route. So you have a trust, and normally all VCFs are set as trusts, maybe because of the Income Tax Act, maybe because of the Trust Act, because the trust, as you know, under the Income Tax Act, sections 161 to 166, acts like a pass-through entity. Whatever is the taxation of the beneficiaries, the representative assesses ultimately the taxation of the trust. And therefore, at times, you may have a case of your client wanting to set up a structure which is a pass-through structure like a trust. And we had a case when an Australian entity wanted to invest, not in a company, because again, Australia rates of tax were very high and he was not really getting credit. So he was being imposed on the tax in India in the case of a company after the DDT, and then again taxes in Australia, and the Australian taxes were much higher. So he wanted a pass-through structure. So we had applied to the FIPB after months together did not reply to it, and then therefore we had to close that particular file. But the reason why I am saying is that one can look at these structures is because of the pass-through nature of a trust, which would mean that your non-resident beneficiary also will get the same, whatever is his taxation will be the taxation of whatever is that of the trust, and hence as a result of that it may be advantageous. Yeah.
Suppose there is a case that there is a foreign charitable trust, they want to have a setup of the same activity for charitable trust in India. So how do you do that?
That is normally processed under the representative office or the branch office route.
But not as a trust.
It is not FDI. So basically you have a non-profit association it wants to set up. So if you look at all the Lions clubs and the IATAs and all those who are charitable trusts outside or who are non-profit associations, they come into India through the representative office or the liaison office route. So that was the point on the trusts and other entities. For all other entities other than companies and whatever has been listed, yes.
For the purpose of these investments which are made in proprietorship by NRI, it will be under this clause only when that NRI is carrying on proprietorship business being outside India. Because the moment he comes to India and he is there in India for the purpose of business, he would qualify to be a resident as per definition of PEMA eventually. So, I mean,
Yeah, so that's a valid point, but he could be like a sleeping, not a very active partner and
No, but
be in
for a
India. So he's carrying on
proprietary
business from
concern-
India.
For a proprietary concern, it would be like what we understand.
For a proprietary
Yeah.
concern, it may be a little bit of a challenge,
Okay.
because if the proprietor himself is here and he is
Right.
carrying on the business, then clearly there could be an issue of whether, but if he has other businesses outside India and this is another business in India, then maybe in terms of then that where is do his main interests and where is his intention, where to stay, that may
Then his
decide where he
stay
is a resident
criteria-
of.
Then his stay criteria would be analyzed depending.
Stay criteria would be one factor, but I think the more important factor would be the intention. So like you have in the treaty, the tiebreaker type of rule, you may have to look at that. I don't think this has been practically ever tested, just like many other things in RBI, but this could be something which could come up. So in a partnership firm, yes, you could say that I am only
that
making
would
this
not be an
investment, I am not very active.
Right.
It could also lead to maybe other provisions of tax may come into picture, because if you are having your controller management in India, then that entire income of that fellow may get sucked into India as far as this. Of course, this business will be taxable in India, but if he has other businesses and if he is a proprietor, then somebody may say that your entire control, even if a part of the controller management,
Is done
if it's
from
in India in terms of a partnership business, then you get taxed in India. So those are other ramifications which will have to be looked at. But in terms of some of these sectors where there is no possibility of an FDI coming in, the only point I wanted to highlight is an NRI can look at these sectors for coming into India. In India? From a non-resident partner or a? No, for a non-resident partner, it would have to be processed under whatever is the route possible. There are some borrowing regulations which are allowed, but I am not sure that a partnership is allowed to borrow from a partner. So you'll have to take specific permissions for them.
So otherwise, whatever the amount comes, that will be treated as a capital.
Yes, it has to be come in capital. You can't do borrowings.
Sir, the NRI wants to carry out business through proprietary concern, then would he be obliged to set up a branch?
A branch.
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
Otherwise, how would he carry out?
So the business will be whatever is the business, A and Co, B and Co, whatever it is. He is not really required to set up a branch and take a permission from the RBI. As others, like the place of business rules say, representative office, branch office, project office, all need to come to the RBI and take registration. Here is not required to take the registration. And one regulation of FEMA is giving him the window to come in and operate really. So you are in a way being blessed by a regulation of FEMA 2 in order to come and do that business. Any other questions? No.
Sir, under Schedule 4, the NRIs can't make the investments in listed securities.
Yes, they can't make.
Within Schedule 3 and Schedule 4, there is a difference.
Yeah, Schedule 4 looks at private limited companies also. Whatever is on the non-repatriation basis is all permitted in Schedule 4. Schedule 3 is looking more at the portfolio investment scheme. That's the real difference between the two. As I said, this proprietary concern and Schedule 4 has origins before liberalization took place, where they allowed NRIs to come into India first only on a non-repatriation basis. So if they had various schemes like the 24% scheme, 40% scheme, 74% scheme, you could invest on a non-repatriation basis in India, but take the profits also were not allowed. So there were specific sectors. So in order to continue this, Schedule 4 actually blesses what was allowed in the past. Portfolio scheme, Schedule 3. Similarly, partnership is, in those days it was either investment in a company / investment in a partnership firm or a proprietary business. And I think there used to be a form called Form FIN or something that could be filed in those days, where DIN was for companies. There was a FIN for partnership firms. So that was the logic. I think with that, these are some of the annexures in relation to the investment procedure, annexures in relation to the sectoral policy, which I think has already been covered in the first part. Second annexure which I mentioned was the Schedule 5 has the nexus to Schedule 5, and what can FIIs, FPIs, QFIs and NRIs invest in investments other than equity or equity derived instruments. And therefore, these are them. They are a huge amount. Debt instruments, there are, as I said, ARC securities, and this more or less is similar, and you will see a similar trend all throughout, and nothing really very significant in terms of policy. It is more a matter of detail, a more matter of procedure. You have to look at, does this investment qualify? And as I said, this debt window keeps on getting regulated from time to time. I think with that, it's already 1:15, and I'm sure a lot of you are more enthusiastic at having a go at lunch rather than listening to me. And I'll respect that sentiment. As they say, it's always better to leave the audience before the audience leaves you. And before you get too hungry and you start, there is food. There has been enough food for thought. I think it's time you thought of food. And with those words, I leave you. Thank you so much.
I think Mr. Hegde started to know that he has been asked to cover something analogous to income from other sources, but I think he would be humble in missing out the point that FII investments under Schedule 2 sometimes sway the stock market, and that's an important point to consider. And he has covered a lot of schedules under inbound investment, and personally he's a avid cricket enthusiast. So in terms of cricket, I would say that he has played a test match in a T20 format, you know. So in a very short span of period, he has covered so many schedules. So let us appreciate by carrying it with a hearty vote of hearty. We'll break for lunch and we'll reassemble at 2:15. Sure. Thank you.